Hi, VencoreWeather.com meteorologist Paul Dorian here on Friday, April 20th. Well, despite the fact that there is still winter-like cold outside in the Mid-Atlantic region, it is time to take a look at the tropical outlook for the Atlantic Basin as well as the Mid-Atlantic summertime outlook. The official hurricane season begins in only a little bit more than a month away from now on June 1st and ends on November 30th. Of course, Mother Nature can begin and end anytime she chooses. Last summer was a hyperactive season, tropical season, with 17 different tropical storms, 10 of which became hurricanes, and 6 of those reached major hurricane status, categories 3, 4, and 5. One of the first things I like to do whenever dealing with a longer range forecast, such as a tropical outlook, is to take a look at the sea surface temperature anomalies around the world, and we'll focus in on that over the next several minutes. In addition, I like to go back and try to find analog years in which there were similar, not only atmospheric conditions, but oceanic conditions to the current season. And that could give us a clue as to what to expect in the upcoming tropical season by taking a look back at some analog years and look at the results in those particular years. Well, let's show up front here the summary of my feelings right now. And all in all, I think this will turn out to be a near normal tropical season in the Atlantic Basin. Again, this follows a hyperactive season of 2017, and the year before that was also above normal in 2016, but I think this year is leaning towards a more normal type year, and that is 12 tropical storms, 6 of which can reach hurricane status, and 2 or 3 would reach major hurricane status, categories 3, 4, and 5. So again, a near normal tropical season is expected right now. In terms of the major factor, La Nina continues to rule the day in the equatorial part of the Pacific Ocean. That is colder than normal sea surface temperatures, and has been that way for the past several months, right through the past winter season. However, there are numerous signs, numerous computer forecast models that predict a transition from the current weak La Nina to a weak El Nino by the middle and latter part of the summer. We'll talk about the ramifications of that transition from La Nina to El Nino in coming months. In terms of the Atlantic Ocean itself, there are mixed signals going on right now in terms of the potential for tropical activity this summer. Some areas have warmer than normal sea surface temperatures, some areas have colder than normal. Again, mixed signals for the overall tropical season. One thing I want to point out right now is that there are still warmer than normal sea surface temperatures in much of the western Atlantic, the Caribbean Sea, and the Gulf of Mexico. That has been the case really for the past several years. That leads to the possibility of some what I like to call homegrown tropical hits, where storms develop closer to the U.S. and then can hit the southern or eastern part of the U.S. It's really 2 types of tropical storms that we monitor here in the U.S. One, the homegrown type system that forms suddenly perhaps in the Gulf of Mexico, over the Bahamas, in the Caribbean Sea, and then cuts to the north and northwest into the U.S. And the other is a typical tropical wave that comes off the west coast of Africa, rides along in the trade winds from the east to the west, and then could curve northwest into the U.S. or north out to sea into the northern part of the Atlantic Ocean. In terms of analog years, I went back to the middle of last century trying to find years that have had a La Nina in the early to middle part of the year that transitions into an El Nino into the mid and late part of the year, and found 2 or 3 different analog years, a couple of which I think are very close to the conditions right now, both in terms of the sea surface temperatures as well as atmospheric patterns. And by taking a look at what happened in those years, we can get a clue as to what we can expect this year. And in those particular analog years, the Mid-Atlantic region featured near normal to slightly below normal temperatures, and near normal to slightly above normal precipitation values. So that is kind of giving us a clue as to what we can possibly expect here in the summer season in the Mid-Atlantic region. Well, let's take a look at the current sea surface temperature anomalies. By the way, all of these plots that I will show in the video will be in the posting on the Tropical Outlook on the weather website. First of all, La Nina continues to rule the day here in the equatorial part of the Pacific Ocean. Here's South America, the west coast of South America, colder than normal conditions in the along the equator in the Pacific Ocean. That is a big factor, but again, most computer forecast models transition this from La Nina to El Nino by the middle or latter part of the summer, probably going from weak La Nina to neutral, and then to weak El Nino by the middle or latter part of the summer. La Nina is typically a favorable sign for tropical storm activity in the Atlantic Ocean, whereas El Nino is typically an unfavorable sign. What happens in El Nino years is that an El Nino in the tropical Pacific actually tends to increase wind shear in the tropical Atlantic. Stronger winds over the Pacific Ocean translate into the tropical Atlantic, and higher wind shear in the tropical Atlantic tends to inhibit tropical storm formation or tropical storm intensification. So right now, the fact that there is colder than normal conditions here in the tropical Atlantic is pretty much a positive sign here. We'll call it a positive in terms of the potential for tropical activity this summer in the Atlantic. However, again, this is supposed to transition to an El Nino, so it very well could end up being an unfavorable sign for tropical activity if in fact this weak El Nino develops during the mid and latter part of the summer. Other areas, first of all, notice here off the west coast of Africa, a pretty widespread area below normal temperatures. That is a negative. The tropical storms tend to form when the ocean temperatures are about 85 degrees or higher. We look for areas of above normal and below normal in the breeding grounds of the Atlantic Ocean, namely off the west coast of Africa all the way to the Gulf of Mexico and Caribbean Sea, but mixed signals in the Atlantic. Notice over here in the western Atlantic, the Gulf of Mexico, and the Caribbean Sea, above normal conditions. So this is a favorable factor. So again, mixed signals coming right now from the Atlantic Ocean. One final thing I want to point out here. Notice this widespread area of above normal juxtaposed with the colder than normal La Nina. This could result in strong winds in the boundary zone between the warmer to the waters to the north and colder to the south. And stronger winds here at this boundary zone could end up producing some wind shear in the tropical Atlantic. That by itself is kind of a negative sign for tropical activity. So a lot of mixed signals going on in terms of sea surface temperatures in the Atlantic Ocean and Pacific Ocean. Well, here's a compilation of forecast models, prediction of Enso, El Nino Southern Oscillation, whether or not we'll have La Nina or El Nino conditions. Again, right now we're starting off below the zero line. This is the neutral line right in this region right here, and these are the 3-month rolling averages going through the year 2018. Right now we are in La Nina conditions here, but almost all of these computer forecast models transition from La Nina to weak El Nino by the middle or latter part of the summer. For example, right here is July, August, and September time period. And again, a transition is predicted by many of these computer forecast models from La Nina to El Nino. So that by itself gives us kind of mixed signal. Right now, La Nina conditions, again, are more favorable for Atlantic Ocean tropical activity, whereas El Nino is unfavorable. So we kind of go from a plus to neutral to a negative. All in all, pretty mixed signals in terms of what's going on in the Pacific Ocean. Now, one point I want to make here is a year ago at this time, it looked like El Nino was going to become established, and in fact it did, and it was going to, at least it was predicted by many of these same models, to continue through the summer, into the fall, and even into the winter season. That did not happen. El Nino dissipated rather rapidly during the early and middle part of last summer. That became more bullish for tropical activity, so there were a lot of forecast changes in the middle of the summer last year because El Nino fell apart, and indeed it turned out to be a hyperactive season, especially during the mid and latter part of the summer of 2017. Well, in terms of analog years, Again, I try to focus on years that had La Nina conditions in the early to middle part of the year, and then El Nino in the mid and latter part of the year. And a couple of years jumped out, 2006 and 1951. Very close analogs, in my opinion, to this particular year of 2018. 1976 is also a pretty close year in terms of the sea surface temperature anomaly pattern going into the hurricane season in the April-May time frame. So those 3 years are what I selected as analog years: 2006, 1951, and 1976. And again, those top two, 2006 and 1951, I think are very close, perhaps even better analogs than the third choice, but I'm using all three. This is actually the sea surface temperature anomaly pattern. Same time of the year, in April of 2006. Look at the similarities here. La Nina over here in the equatorial part of the Pacific, just like what we have right now. I didn't point this out, but also a colder pocket tucked in along the Alaska coastline, just like we have right now in the northwest part of Canada. So the Pacific Ocean, very similar in April 2006 compared to this current time frame of April 2018. Well, in terms of what happened in those particular analog years in terms of tropical activity, I wanted to take a look at the geopotential height anomalies at 500 millibars, and then the sea level pressure anomalies. First of all, in terms of the 500 millibar height anomalies for the summer season in those analog years, notice in the Atlantic Basin, basically nothing significant. Near normal conditions here in the Gulf of Mexico, the Caribbean Sea, much of the Atlantic Ocean. So again, those analog years kind of lending support to the idea of a near normal season in the Atlantic Basin. Now, let's take a look at the sea surface pressure anomaly pattern in those analog years. And here we go. Sea level pressure anomalies also not showing anything significant in those analog years as far as the Atlantic Basin is concerned. Just a bunch of near normal conditions here. So certainly these analog years in terms of the atmospheric patterns lead credence to the support of a near normal tropical season in the 2018 summer season. Well, how about the actual numbers for those analog years? Again, 2006, 1951, I think we're very close to this year, so I've double weighted these particular years in terms of coming up with an average here, and it also included 1976 as an average year. And basically, those particular years had relatively normal results in terms of the number of tropical storms, the number of hurricanes, and the number of majors. Again, the average not too far from normal. Normal, again, is typically 12 tropical storms, 6 hurricanes, and 2 or 3 majors, relatively normal. So again, these analog years support the idea of a near normal 2018 tropical season. Well, now let's take a look at what we can expect in the Mid-Atlantic region. And first of all, I do not think that there's a possibility of an excessively hot summer with any kind of severe drought conditions. One of the important factors now is soil moisture is in relatively good shape across the eastern part of the nation. In fact, this is the latest view of soil moisture as of this time of the year, late April, and we've had significant rains in recent weeks, and in addition, it's been a very cold March and April throughout the eastern half of the nation. That is a good thing for soil moisture because it reduces evaporation that could take place this time of the year. If we had some hot and dry weather, you certainly could have some evaporation of that soil moisture. But going into the late spring and the summer, it looks like soil moisture will be in pretty good shape here. That tends to reduce the chances of any kind of extensive heat wave. Heat waves are more likely if the soil is very dry. And that's the worst thing you can have, is going into a summer season with very dry soil conditions. We don't have that. That reduces the chance for an excessively hot summer, and it reduces the chance, of course, for drought conditions, given the fact that the moisture is quite high right now. Well, once again, let's go back to those analog years of 2006, 1951, and 1976 and look and see what happened in the Mid-Atlantic region. On the left here, we have temperature anomalies for those analog years, and basically near normal to slightly below normal temperatures in the Mid-Atlantic region. Blue on the temperature anomaly chart here represents cooler than normal conditions. In terms of precipitation, blue here actually represents wetter than normal conditions, so anywhere from near normal to slightly above normal in terms of precipitation. So again, based on these analog years, we can expect near normal temperatures to slightly below normal and near normal to slightly above normal precipitation amounts in the Mid-Atlantic region. So that's it for now. We'll of course monitor all of this over the next several weeks and couple of months. The main focus of the next few weeks and next couple of months will be, in fact, if that La Nina does indeed transition to an El Nino. That's a crucial factor, and we'll see if that evolves as most of the computer forecast models indicate. La Nina right now, El Nino by the mid or latter part of the summer. All in all, again, I'm expecting a near normal tropical season in the Atlantic Basin. That's it for now. For VencoreWeather.com, I'm meteorologist Paul Dorian.